Ryu Umemoto was someone that I got familiar with at a young age, just by chance, for his game music. He was a video game composer from Japan, mostly known in Japan. He didn't travel so much outside Japan, sadly, until late in his life, and his life ended too soon for that. But he was someone that truly opened the door for many to become video game composers. He legitimized a genre called eroge, eroge being erotic games, which is a huge market in Japan. Back in the 90s, still a very young genre and very untested, so it became a haven for like exploitation, a lot with the storylines and very simplistic music, and you know, the selling point, I think, relied more on a certain aspect of those games, not so much the story or the music, but some other selling points that remain very popular to this day. But Umemoto was someone that saw very much beyond that, along with his friend. And they together made trio games that truly changed that whole genre and also the market of eroge. It became legitimized in the mid-90s thanks to his involvement. He was born in Yokohama in 1974, February 18th. He was born into a fisher family, a kind of standard Japanese upbringing in the 70s. His childhood wasn't remarkably different from many others at that time. Quite good at school, loved his younger brother. I think back to things he told me in person, nothing made me feel his pride more than when he talked about his little brother, because he just said that he loved so much being a big brother. And he saw all of his colleagues and all of his friends as brothers, so he was someone that immediately gave you the feeling of, you know, a kind of sibling or brotherhood to him. So I really can see how he took that role very seriously with his real brother. And I've spoken to him in later times too, and he very much misses his brother because of this. At a young age, he was extremely interested in just symmetry. His dad told me that when they gave him toys, he would not play with these toys. He would just line them up and keep them there. And if they tried to move the car or put, you know, the figure somewhere, the robot walk over, he would get angry. He would just say, "No, no, no! It's supposed to stay there. It's, you know, symmetrically lined up, very nice." So he was someone that was very oriented about things. They need to stay where they were supposed to stay at a young age. When he was young, he wasn't so much involved with technology. He was someone that loved math. I think when he was a kid, he really looked towards a career in math. I'm not sure in which direction, he never told me, but he did tell me that, like, oh, I love math, and that was kind of where he ended that conversation. But he was kind of like a standout when it came to math in his class. His teachers would always tell his parents that this is someone that's going to go somewhere. He's incredibly sharp, you know. Even his first day of school, what the feedback was from his teachers was that he is very good at math. It's just his first day of school. So they could immediately tell that this is someone that really is going to go somewhere, we think, and you should nurture his talent. In his teens, he started getting into games through the Japanese game centers. Like many at the time, you know, Space Invaders and such took over that country. And but his first video game that he saw and that inspired him to kind of go that direction was Elevator Action from Taito. And he said that he went to a Japanese game center with his friend from school. He had some knowledge of video games just through playing at his friend's place. They had a Famicom or maybe an earlier machine, I don't remember, but they had some kind of game console that he could play a little bit, but he said that it didn't really interest him. He couldn't really get it. But when he went to a game center and played Elevator Action, that somehow clicked. That just made him see it. In school, at this time, before he kind of met Elevator Action, he had changed a little bit of his interest. Math had dwindled a bit. He was always good at it, but it didn't really interest him the same way. And he had gone into designing. He loved designing characters and he loved designing mechs, so he had become infatuated with Gundam. And was mostly at school drawing Gundams and his own designs, his own characters, his own story arcs. He showed me once a notebook he had from that time. And it was at least 500 pages, I would think. It was a huge binder with just story that he had written from his own mind. This was just for one semester of school that he had just written this whole saga. And I asked him, oh, did you send this somewhere? Did you like want to go somewhere with this? No, he just liked it. It was just Gundam. So, but when he met the elevator action, he saw the possibility here that he could create a story, create a world, but people could interact with that world. This was much stronger than what he had expected to meet with, you know, either drawing or writing a Gundam story. They can just experience that from his perspective. But here was a possibility of creating something and then letting people dictate where it's going. Later on, he got a PC-88, which a lot of Japanese game developers at the time and programmers started there early as on. At this point, he got this from his parents as a gift, with the idea that this hobby that he had now, video games and writing Gundam and just this general direction he's going into, they wanted to still nurture it, but they were wondering how can we do this and still kind of maintain some interest here academically. And it was Umemoto's own, or Ryu's own idea that PC-88 will allow me to code. I can learn code. And that would interest me a lot. And he told them even about the elevator action. Don't think they understood much what he was saying, but they understood there's something here, and of course we'll support you. So he got a PC-88 and started coding and programming there. Made simple action adventures, text adventures, sorry. Text adventures in the beginning, which he was trying at that point to just allow for more than one way to go with those games. Mostly, if you played text adventures on Commodore and these consoles, you would have to painstakingly write a direction, go right, go left, and then mostly would just ask you what is right and what is left, until you found that one word that he had programmed in to be, you know, recognized. But Ryu tried very hard to program the game to have many more selections than just one direction, one linear path. After he was done with high school, there was a big change in him. I think at this time he had realized that programming games, the gameplay itself, I don't know if that interested him so much. He found it too frustrating. At this time, the technology just wouldn't allow for what he was maybe trying to do. Had he been brought up today, maybe he would have more fun with that. Back then, I think he just saw, he was someone that loved limitation, but if the limitation became too frustrating, he kind of moved on. And I think he saw gameplay as kind of limited compared to his ideas, just simply at this time, and figured that this is a job for someone else. He had become interested in video game music, though, through coding, and seeing how far he could push sound equipment, sound drivers, on the PC-88 mostly, simply because he was going into assembly and just pushing the limits of what we can do with such a machine. So that was where he sparked some interest in doing video game music, was just that whereas he couldn't push the gameplay element so far right now, he did find a way to push the sound capabilities, and he did find that telling stories through music was something that he really enjoyed doing. So he had decided at that point, around the age of, I think 18, he said that video game music was something he definitely wanted to pursue. He had done some freelance work at this time in high school. He had done just through magazines again. They would list maybe sometimes that they would need assistance for something sound-based, and then he would just write in and say, I can do that. Mostly for a company called FamilySoft, which was doing Gundam games. So he did get to work on Gundam at this point, and he was quite proud of that, even though the compositions were kind of limited and he was told very strictly what to do. He did get to work officially on Gundam products. So he was quite proud of that, even to his last day, that I did work on Gundam. In terms of getting into the video game industry for Umemoto though, the biggest change was that after high school and the beginning of university, I think he had had a talk with his family about taking over their fishing business. That was what they primarily did. And he loved his father's trade. He had nothing against it, but he definitely saw that his interests in fish at a young age, helping his dad, was more in nurturing the fish and, you know, bringing it to life and seeing its evolutionary journey to becoming a full fish and things like that. So he didn't necessarily care so much about catching it, selling it. This aspect didn't interest him. So when he was done with high school and looked at kind of where he was heading, his father wanted to get a business degree and take over the business when that time would come. And Ryu looked at his alternatives here and just, he didn't see it going in that direction. He didn't want to do business about fish and trade. So he actually ran away. He just packed up his bags and during a late night he ran away. He didn't tell his parents where he was going. He didn't tell his brother. And just because I think he felt a little bit troubled about what he was doing himself at this time. But he had made a decision that he wanted to work with video games. He wanted to work with video game music. And he was very scared that his father would not accept this. In the beginning, his father was probably a bit skeptical of this direction, but in a few years later, it was fully accepted. Mostly his freelance work was with licensed products, but he eventually was very tired of these deadlines. He would say that sometimes he would have to finish a project in mere hours after getting the phone call from FamilySoft, and this didn't really strike him as a good deal. So he kind of put his name out there. People had recognized him inside the industry at this point as someone that, whereas his melodies were not known yet, his capabilities of pushing sound, the sound technology further was definitely there. They could hear that the crispiness and just the sound and just the technical aspect of what he was doing on these Gundams and the other mech games that they were releasing was definitely something different from their other titles. So going freelance from there, he quit, or didn't quit necessarily, but he just stopped answering the phone for FamilySoft and wanted to find something else and put his name out there with absolutely no security, wondering what was going to happen. A couple of days later, after just kind of stopping his association with FamilySoft, he did get a phone call from Umemoto, which was doing mostly eroge games at that time, about coming in and doing sound work for them. So he continued on under contract with them, and at this place he met a man that would change very much his life, which was Hiroyuki Kano. So with him they started quite the tale together and making some games that still to this day is very popular in Japan. But Umemoto were doing visual novels almost exclusively. I think they had some other puzzle games with erotic content in them, which I don't remember the names of. But Umemoto at this time when he started there met Hiroyuki Kano, who was a writer and was doing stories for visual novels. So him and Kano immediately struck a friendship, because they both felt that we're now in a company that's giving us kind of free reign. We can do whatever we want. We have very similar philosophies, what we want to do. We want to tell stories, we want to tell very deep stories. And here is a genre that's kind of young, but it's allowing us, visual novels is allowing us to tell stories very differently than a platformer, a puzzle game, or an action game. So they started working on a game together called Desire in the beginning. In the beginning, when eroge started kind of becoming popular, as I said, it was very much exploitation. It became popular through the boundaries that they were breaking, and just kind of the taboo of having erotic content through video games is very new. And you know, Kano and Umemoto saw very much past this. They knew that, of course, the market is demanding erotic content. This we can't disregard it, but at the same time, that's not wrong. Eroticism can tell a very great story. It can be part of a very big story. It doesn't even have to be the main component. It can be one of the components to tell a great story. And so Kano was an amazing writer, a science fiction writer mostly, and just knew how to illustrate characters perfectly and also develop those characters through his text and his story. Just character development in general was fantastic in his games. But his process was very much connected to Umemoto. They would discuss these games at length all the time. And whereas Kano would write, Umemoto would have just as much to do with where the story was going, and Kano would have just as much to do with where the music was going, and allowing Umemoto to just kind of like build something truly magnificent from that. He trusted Umemoto's talents to compose, But when it came to the fact that they still needed the right emotion, they needed the right narrative, they needed the right atmosphere to this whole thing, they worked completely together to make this happen. So the music, in those games I always say that the music is a voice that whispers to you throughout the whole game, because Umemoto uses almost a voice for his melodies to tell you exactly what is going on beyond the camera or beyond the text. There's something so much more deeply going on, and that music is telling you everything you need to know. And anyone can get that because there's no language here, there's just music. Because of these games, we mentioned that Desire was their first project. They went on to do Eve Burst Error, which was a very famous game and had several sequels that had nothing to do with Umemoto, sadly. And also, in the end, Uno. And Uno is now being remade as we speak. And Uno especially was seen as a revolutionary. The story was multiple branch directions you could go in. The music was just incredible, so deep. And the erotic content, not the main component that I mentioned, but here was the story was so front and center, and the music was such a part of the story. And so Uno, still to this day, is on many people's top 10 games of all time list in Japan. Has sadly never been officially released in the West, but certainly the music speaks for itself. That's fantastic. What Umemoto did for that genre and that market was that before him in Kano there was really no quality assurance to that genre at all. There was just kind of like, what you manage to put out will sell. The people demand just the erotic content. The more you get, the better. And don't worry so much if the game plays well. Don't worry if the game doesn't work. As long as you just can see a few pictures, they're going to be fine. And they want to create games. They want to create stories that people actually care about, characters that they remember for the rest of their lives. So when they released these games, and they sold millions over in Japan, especially Uno, sold quite a lot, and was released on Sega Saturn and such consoles. What it did was that here was a market that was open to anyone, to everything, but now Umemoto had put actual quality in there, so it became the new place to kind of start out your career. A lot of people, kind of like with the indie scene today, they would go into eroge or to visual novels, and really just the freedom there to compose, to tell stories would allow them to just have a freedom that couldn't be given by the bigger companies or from Square Enix or Nintendo or Sega. These people would have much more restrictions on their music, but visual novels allowed you to have a lot of freedom. So after Umemoto, that became very much the breeding ground for Japanese game music for a long time. And he can single-handedly be said to have opened those doors for a lot of people. Yeah, sadly in 2011 he passed away. I had contact with him leading up to his death, pretty much I'd say on a bi-weekly basis. I was speaking to him, and I heard from him personally through phone or through Skype. I don't know if I could say that Umemoto cared about himself so much, in the sense that he wanted to kind of focus on everyone else but himself. And if you tried to kind of express your worry for him, he was someone that just said, don't worry. So he was just impossible to read in that sense. I had noticed last time I saw him that he had definitely lost weight, and something was up, and I asked him quite often if he was doing okay. In the last couple months he admitted he had a fever that wouldn't leave, and they had diagnosed him with bronchitis, chronic bronchitis, which had just flared up recently. And in the last month of his life, his wife started contacting me to update me on the situation. And sadly, on August 16th, I got the message. Umemoto's biggest legacy was just, of course, opening the doors to a whole new generation of expressing themselves in video games through visual novels. He was someone that even later on, as his career maybe in many ways was starting to relax a bit. He was stepping back a bit until the very last year of his life, where he was stepping back into the video game industry for a company called Cave. But The legacy he left behind was very strong because people would still approach him for advice and also to work with him personally. And he was someone that he would give advice and he would help everyone that came into his path. It didn't matter if they had worked on 100 games or 10 games or 1 game or no games. He was someone that would give you the time and the advice of any kind of experience. And I remember one of the greatest things to really get to know after his passing was that I was doing a memorial for him along with a lot of his friends in Japan for both an article on Gama Sutra and a live event in Japan. And through this I spoke to many of his family members and a lot of his friends that had worked with him, and they all said that this was Big Brother. This was someone that truly cared about them, and they all just couldn't believe that he was now gone. So he left behind a great legacy both for his fans and for those who knew him. So my favorite song from Umemoto has always been a song called Relate from Eve Burster. And this song I asked him once about, is telling him that this is my favorite, but I feel like in this soundtrack, this song tells me something very different from the other songs. And why is that? And he smiled at me and said that one day you'll figure it out. And I think I figured it out, and I think it's because all the other songs tell a story of people in trouble or people in some kind of situation that they need to work out. But Relate, they finally found each other and they found the unity. And I think Umemoto himself was someone that loved the experience of finding unity with people. So in this song, I really feel that I can still hear him talk to me. So I would definitely tell everyone to go and listen to Relate by Ryu Umemoto.